Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started. Welcome to Laundry Rock, Histories of Laundries of Boston, Chinatown, co-presented by Pao Arts Center and Chinese Historical Society of New England. My name is Cynthia Wu. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the director of the Pao Arts Center. Thank you for joining us. Our team presenting today comes to you from native lands of the Massachusetts, Pawtucket, Nipmuc in present-day Metro Boston area and Framingham, the lands of Agawam, Nipmuc, Pennacook, Abenaki people, and the Wabanaki Confederacy in present-day Georgetown, Mass, Nashua, New Hampshire, and East Thetford, Vermont, as well as the land of the Ramaytush people of present-day Belmont, California. If you are interested in learning more about the native lands you may inhabit, check out the link nativelands.ca, which was just dropped in the chat. For those of you new to us, Pao Arts Center is a program collaboration between Boston Chinatown Neighborhood Center, BCNC, and Bunker Hill Community College, and we opened in 2017 as Boston Chinatown's first community-based art center. Our mission is to strengthen and celebrate Asian Pacific Islander voices and perspectives in the Chinatown neighborhood and greater Boston, providing access to creative, cultural, and educational opportunities. We're excited to be here today for this public program inspired by the work of our 2020 artist in resident, Wen-hao Tien, and our current exhibit, Home on Our Backs, on view at the center. Just so you know, the format of today's program will be a set of presentations. It'll be followed by a roundtable discussion and finally audience Q&A. If you have questions during today's event, you can drop them in the Q&A box, but you can also add comments to the chat and our team will move them to the Q&A box for you for the roundtable and Q&A part of today's program. Just a note, when you submit things through the Q&A box, it is anonymous. If you want to add your name to it, please drop it in the chat and we'll include that. Lastly, we also recognize that this program is being brought to you in the midst of a global pandemic, and in the past year has resulted in an increase in anti-Asian sentiment. Now more than ever, we must create spaces for our histories to be told and heard and discussed. And we hope that we've created that sort of environment for you today. We also recognize that time is short, and this is possibly only the beginning of a really interesting discussion. You will also notice that we do have ASL interpretation. So occasionally we might just try to slow down throughout today's program so Danny can catch up. Now I'd love to pass the screen over to Brianna Allen from Chinese Historical Society of New England. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you, Cynthia, for that introduction. And thank you everyone for being here with us today. In case you are unfamiliar with CHSNE, it is the first educational organization dedicated solely to documenting, preserving, and promoting the history and legacy of Chinese immigration in New England. CHSNE is governed by board members and staff representing a wide range of experiences, perspectives, and expertise. Active community collaboration and membership participation underline our program development, exhibit design, and collection building. This will be our third Tunney F. Lee Memorial Lecture Series. In memory of the 2002 Sojourner Award recipient and our longtime friend and collaborator, Professor Tunney F. Lee, CHSNE has established the Tunney F. Lee Memorial Lecture Series to continue his lifelong work of preserving and promoting the history of Chinese Americans. The series features speakers on various topics related to the history of the Chinese Americans, and lectures and seminars are held in Boston area locations or virtually based on speaker availability and health regulations at the time. Tunney himself has kindly given many interesting talks on the history of Chinese and Chinatown in Boston over the years, so we see this as a fitting tribute to his legacy of historical preservation. Now, let's introduce the panelists today. First, we have Wen-hao Tien. She is a Cambridge-based visual artist and educator. Wen-hao grew up in Taiwan, with family roots in Shandong Province, China. She moved to the United States in 1988 to pursue graduate studies and ultimately became a naturalized citizen. Tien feels an urgency to interpret the shifting Chinatown cultural landscape, which has changed radically since she first encountered it in 1990s. Next, we have Shauna Lo. She is the Assistant Director of the Institute for Asian American Studies at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, where she works on programs and research projects related to Asian American communities in Massachusetts. She has a strong interest in Chinese American history and immigration during the Exclusion era, particularly in the Boston area. Eugenio Menegon teaches Chinese history and world history in the Department of History at Boston University. He was the director of the Boston University Center for the Study of Asia in 2012 to 2015. His interests include Chinese-Western relations in late imperial times, Chinese religions and Christianity in China, Chinese science, the intellectual history of Republican China, the history of maritime Asia, and Chinese food history. We also have 3 community members here with us today. Richard Chin is a retired Chinatown YMC director, community activist, and has worked at several Chinatown agencies for over 5 decades. He is an immigrant from Tucson, China, arriving 10 years after the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act, and grew up in Boston's Chinatown. Dr. Raymond Chin was born in Wilmington, Delaware in 1950. His father was from Tucson, and his mother was the first Chinese baby born in Wakefield, Mass. Both of their families owned laundries in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Delaware. Currently, Ray is a clinical psychologist who lives in East Thetford, Vermont. He is married and has 2 grown sons who are married to wonderful wives and has 3 grandchildren. Finally, Walter Wong was born and raised in a Boston laundry to his parents who immigrated from China after World War II. Now retired, early on, Walter was a community volunteer in Chinatown during undergraduate studies at the original Chinatown Golden Age Center in the 1970s. His career focused on employment, equal opportunity, and career management across financial, government sectors, and high technology in Silicon Valley. Now I pass the torch on to Shauna Lo for a history of the laundries in Boston, Chinatown.
Hi, good afternoon. I just want to say thank you to the Pao Arts Center and the Chinese Historical Society of New England for organizing this special event. I'm going to give a brief history of laundries in the Boston region. So there has been surprisingly very little documentation on Chinese-owned laundries in the United States, which is a shame given that laundries are so essential to the Chinese experience in the United States, particularly in the Northeast. And they were a significant feature of American life in the 20th century. So Chinese laundries in the Boston area date back over 140 years ago to the 1870s. By 1880, there were already over 100 Chinese laundry workers listed in Boston in the US Census. Now, laundries were certainly not limited to Boston. By 1900, there were about 3,000 Chinese in Massachusetts, and nearly 90% were laundry workers. And laundries remained an essential part of Chinese American life for decades. So why laundries? Well, Chinese likely brought the trade to the East Coast from the West and Midwest in the 1870s and 1880s, when Chinese came eastward looking for employment opportunities and to escape anti-Chinese violence. Now, there were very few opportunities for jobs for Chinese because people would not hire them generally. Now, self-employment was pretty much their only option. In addition, many Chinese immigrants in those days did not speak English well, and one did not need to speak much English to run a laundry. Another reason has to do with timing and being able to find a niche. In the late 19th century, there was an opening for laundry businesses on the East Coast because of urbanization and industrialization. Indeed, Chinese laundries were situated largely in urban areas and along transportation lines. They served primarily two kinds of customers. One was people who lived in apartments and did not have the facilities or the space to wash and dry their laundry. And also working professionals, particularly men, needed their shirts starched and pressed. And more women were working outside the home and did not have time to do the wash. So Chinese-owned laundries were not actually a feature of Chinatown. They weren't located in Chinatown, but they were spread out all over Boston and all over the region. And that was to be near their customers. So there is a Chinese business directory at the Historical Society from 1931, which lists 250 Chinese-owned laundries in Boston alone. People wanted the convenience of picking up their laundry near where they lived or worked. They liked having the personalized service from a small business and from someone they knew and trusted. And they wanted their laundry done cheaply. Now, laundry workers, however, were a feature of Chinatown. Chinatown served laundry workers from all over New England. The laundrymen would come in on Saturday nights or Sundays to socialize and do business. They would eat, shop for groceries, take a nice bath, and visit their family and village associations. Chinatown was a lifeline, particularly for men here without families, and for those who did not speak English well. So let me describe a bit about what life was like in the laundry. So laundry used to be considered one of, if not the most arduous household chore. Imagine not having running water or electricity. The process was you had to get the water, soak the clothes, scrub them, boil them, rinse and dry, and then starch and iron them. Now, the fact was that people just didn't wash their clothes very much. So prior to World War II, laundries, Chinese laundries, were run mostly by a single man, perhaps with a partner or two, usually living in the back of their shop. Now, before the 1930s or so, all the work had to be done by hand. So there were no machines to do the wash and dry. They would work from early morning into the evening, and later if there were orders that had to be finished. It was extremely difficult and lonely life. Generally, men left their families in China and sent money home. because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, Chinese men who were laborers were not allowed to bring wives from China until after World War II. So some years ago, I worked on an oral history project, which was a collaboration between where I work, the Institute for Asian American Studies, and the Chinese Historical Society. And I interviewed several former laundry owners and adult children whose parents owned laundries in the Boston area. They talked about their lives from the 1940s and 1950s, and the transcripts are available online. So almost all of the interviewees for this project were part of families that ran laundries. During this period, laundry work had become less arduous, as shop owners did not have to do everything by hand anymore. Clothes were sent out to a wet wash. In other words, a commercial laundry that had machines to wash the clothes. The clothes would be returned wet in the middle of the night or early morning. Then they needed to be dried, pressed, and packaged. In the early days, irons had to be heated on the stove. By this time, there were electric irons and then pressing machines. But the laundry life was still very tough. And some of the themes from my interviews are that our long hours and dirty work. Interviewees described working very long hours, even 18 or 20-hour days sometimes. Friday nights could be very late since customers often picked up their laundry on Saturday mornings. Everyone in the family helped out in the laundry, even young children. They moved from sorting dirty clothes up to ironing and other tasks. In the summers, it was extremely hot inside because of the heat from the boiler in the earlier days and from the pressing machines. Sunday was the only day off. The family would often go into Chinatown to shop or visit the family or village association. Nobody I talked to ever took vacation. Now, they lived in cramped quarters. Most families started out living in the back of the laundry. And some children remember being told by their parents not to complain and to be grateful they did not have to sleep on the ironing boards like some other families did. Later, the family was able to move to an apartment or a house. But life was difficult, particularly in the post-Depression period. People lived very frugally. Now, the children worked hard. They had a long day. They went to school, regular school first, and then to Chinese school in Chinatown afterwards, if they did not live too far away. They helped out in the laundry during the afternoon as well, and did homework in the evening. Now, the interviewees grew up in racially mixed neighborhoods or among ethnic whites. They described the neighborhood children as sometimes being very cruel. However, many of the families grew close to certain customers and neighbors. So the laundries generally closed in the 1960s and 1970s as business slowed. People started to get washing machines at home, and the fabric of clothes changed so they were not so wrinkly. Now, a few laundries stayed open into the 1980s and beyond, They took in dry cleaning, some opened coin operated machines. Generally, the kids went off to college, got professional jobs, and did not take over the laundries. So we're fortunate today to be joined by some guests who grew up in laundry families, and later they'll share some of their experiences. So I hope this provides some background for the rest of the program. And thank you, Danny, for your interpretation.
Hi, everyone. I think it's my turn, right? All right. So I'm Wen-hao Tien. Thank you, Shauna, for such a comprehensive talk in such a short time about the Chinese laundry history and a very personal material as well. So I personally really appreciate listening to your talk. And thank you to organizers, thank you all my friends, and thank you friends of the panelists, and thank you friends of Chisney and the Pao Arts Center. So let me begin by sharing my screen. This is a painting of mine currently at my exhibition at Pao Arts Center, Laundry Rock, 别有洞天 in Chinese. So let me first say, if a painting can help create a forum such as this one, then I think it is the best reward any artist can ask. So I am grateful. And I want to explain why do I put the two concepts together, the Chinese laundry and the Chinese fine art culture, 共识. It's not called Laundry Rock, it's called the Scholar Rock. And you can see by now that these rocks looks like rocks, but they're actually shirts. So it's an image transfer onto paper, and I colored with plants, natural pigments. So this is sort of precious Chinese scholar rock. And so when we appreciate scholar rock, we look at many things, but let me summarize. One is the folds and the lines. One is the texture, the holes, the big holes, and the small little holes. And its overall gesture. You see, this one is landing, the sculpture is landing on pointy feet, as if a willowy lady walking. So the scholar rock tradition dated way back as early as the ancient times, Sui Tang Dynasty. And there is an imperial garden made out of scholar rocks. And these rocks are complete natural found objects. You probably know it takes thousands and thousands of years to weather 1 millimeter of a hard stone. And so the analogy of scholar rock appreciation is, in a way, is depicting Chinese fundamental philosophy, rooting philosophy of 天人合一, person under the heaven as part of the heaven, is also the rooting philosophy of Taoism. So looking at these rocks let the viewers imagine themselves in nature, in the mountainside. And even though they are sitting right at home or in a palace. But in Song Dynasty, which is about 600 years ago, the scholar class it's a hobby for them to trade rocks, appreciate each other's rocks, and paint them. So this is work by Zhou Shaobai. You see his studies of different rocks. I believe some of them must be his friends. And these rocks eventually piled up into the elements of a literati landscape painting. And so this is where my rock came from, a pile of clothes. When I was researching the Chinese laundry, and I was astounded by many, many things, but one of which is the sheer volume of the work the laundrymans have to do. And not just feed themselves, but for the most part, sending money home. And I have a very high respect for them. And through this inspiration and respect to them, I very naturally just put this idea on the pedestal and create these rocks. However, like the scholar rocks, it is not possible to know nature by staring at a rock. It is not possible to comprehend past and its people if it is not my own. So I don't claim to completely understand the sweats, the blood, the pain the Chinese laundry people have to go through to create the new family here. So I want to share a few historic images. I pick out a few very typical ones, and some of them is really hard to be looking at because it's not an accurate, first of all, depiction of the people themselves, but you can sense the belittling, the discriminations put upon these people. This image obviously is dated probably 1900, early 1900. And cartoon, 1930s. And I want to play, a song sang by Lucy Shelton, a diva who is known for her modern music. Her breathtaking, haunting voice describe the emotion very vividly. And this particular piece called Chinaman Laundryman is based on the poem by T.H. Zen. And T.H. Zen wrote this in 1928, and it was published at the Daily Workers magazine on August 15th, 1928. So it's very hard even for me to be listening to that. But it is this song is, this work is done in 1932. So I think it's a honest description of what the situation was. And late, so it's a very long poem. I encourage you to Google H.T. Zen. And it's a very long poem, but towards the end, I want to play again a short clip of Lucy Shelton's song. So you heard, so the end of the poem and has this up sort of courageous voice. And I wanted to remind you that the same laundryman that's being discriminated, belittled, they are the same people that later organized and raised effort, money to send back to China to help with the Sino-Japanese War. It's the same people later during World War II has enlisted himself in the military, American military, and fought World War II side by side with the fellow Americans. So the contrast of how they're portrayed, not Lucy Shelton just seeing honestly how in society they are being seen. But I want to show you the contrast of what the discrepancy between the public understanding and who they really are. So this is an image of inside a laundry, and during the era of a bachelor society, you probably all know about the Chinese Exclusion Act. So Chinatown was a bachelor society because they cannot be naturalized as citizens, or their wife and children couldn't come. And as Shauna described, they work really long hours, and some reported 18 or 20 hours. The only breaks they have is lunch and dinner. And so this is the next generation. Children grew up in the laundries. So this is a picture from my fellow panelist, Walter Wong, who you later will hear him speak. And I am extremely glad that we will hear from the three gentlemen today, the community members and leaders who will share their firsthand experience growing up in a laundry. But more importantly, what is inside and outside of their laundry family under the social confinement, and how do they break through? How did they break through this social confinement eventually? Like this color of a shirt, it physically still retains the shape. It came out of the shirt and it retains the shape of the shirt. But similarly, we retain our history, what's in the past, what we were given, what we inherited. But spiritually, they cultivated through sorrow, pain, and created amazing camaraderie. So this is what I want to end my my presentation today. Compared to the rest of the panelists, I'm the person who's most unfamiliar to the laundry history. But I'm a learner, but I think what I could do, which I'm very grateful and very humble to have this opportunity, is through visual and metaphors and empathy to try to understand what we're dealing with in our society. Thank you all. Richard, I think I think you're next, Richard. You're muted.
Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today to share a slice of laundry life through a child's perspective. So let me give you a little background history before I tell you the story. The year is 1959, 6 years after I came from China and 6 years before the passage of the Civil Rights Act. So we never talked about rights that the Chinese had. Oh, and so let me give you some background. The location of my father's laundry was in the Mission Hill district of Boston, which is about 3 miles away from Chinatown. And the laundry itself was probably 40 feet by 15 feet. It had 5 workers and a backyard. The neighborhood in which the laundry was located in is predominantly Irish working class on one side, and on the other side was a government project of mixed races. So on vacation times, I would be allowed to go to the laundry. So I was 9 years old, and of course the laundry was hot, and there was no TV, there was no comic books and no games, and I was just asked to sit and be quiet in the chair by the side of the front desk. Of course, I got, antsy. So I asked my father, can I go outside to just get some fresh air? Previously, I was not allowed to go in there because I was told I could not speak or play with any of the neighborhood kids. I didn't understand why, but I soon found out. So my father relented and he said, okay, you can go outside, but you stay right beside the door and don't go anywhere. I walked 10 feet outside the backyard door, and I saw a group of 4 white kids. They were about my age and about the same height. And I saw them giggling, and then I saw them approaching me. And as they approached me, they started hitting me with a chorus of unknown Chinese sounds, the anti-Asian nursery rhymes, and everything you could imagine. I got the whole 9 yards. And I didn't like it. And I said, stop. And they stopped for 1 second. And then they came back with even louder and more racial taunts. I must have blanked out because I don't remember what I was thinking, but I know I wasn't thinking. So I picked up a boulder and I was gonna chase them and try to hit one over the head with this boulder. And when the kids saw me, they started walking the other way, except for one, he stayed on in a defiant posture. And he said to me, China boy, what are you gonna do? And I looked him in the eye, which is contrary to Chinese good manners. I looked him in the eye and I distracted him and I slammed the boulder on his right foot. He yelled out in pain. And then his 2 buddies came back and brought him back home, I guess. And I said, well, I better retreat back into the laundry. And I went in and I told my father, because they could hear the scream from the kid. And I said in Chinese, which was a slower version of, I threw a pebble at his leg. And of course, I didn't tell him the whole story. A few minutes later, the boy's father came at the back door and demanded to speak to the China boy's father. My father brought me out, and the white father said, your boy slammed a rock into my son's foot. And I looked at it, and sure enough, it was black and blue and bruised. I said, on target. But the father said, what are you going to do about it to make this right? If you don't, I'm going to call the police. And 1 second after I heard the word police, I felt a hard slap across the side of my neck and my face and ears. And I was shocked. And it was my father who slapped me. And he told me, say sorry to the man and say sorry to the boys. And so I'm going, oh, sorry, you know. And he said, oh, get back in the laundry. And my father had a few more words with the father. And then he came back in. And he said, I had to hit you publicly, shame you and embarrass you in front of them. If I didn't, that man could have come back at night when we were gone and burned the place down. I'm thinking, nobody does that. Nobody burns things down. I just wasn't aware at the tender age of 9. And then he told me, he said, you're not going to be able to go outside to play anymore. You have to stay inside and you promise not to do anything. Otherwise, you're going to have to stay at home and sit alone. So I thought at that particular moment, I had very mixed emotions. I felt that my father was not the protector that I wanted him to be, that he had succumbed to the white man's power politics. And why was he doing this? And then I thought, geez, this is not understanding. And he then told me, he said, if he burnt this laundry down, I would not have a job. The 4 other men would not have a job. And there would be no way we can recreate this situation where we're all working and supporting our families. So you have to do your part. I said, but they started it by yelling at me. He said, and my dad said, that's nothing. You just disregard it. And it was a very poignant lesson on the race politics in that particular neighborhood. And I understood that. And I kind of felt kind of bad that we were second-class, third-class citizens, and that my father had to live under a veil of threat of violence or fear all the time, in addition to all the hard work that he had to do. So I didn't go back for a year. And later on, I was able to meet some other Irish kids who brought me to their homes and introduced me to American tea with tea bags and cream and sugar and toast. And I said, hey, this is the bomb, you know, so I want to make friends with these people. But in looking back, that day, really, I lost my innocence. And I saw the world in a less rosy picture. But it was a very painful reminder, and somehow it's still deep rooted in my soul somewhere. But I thought that it was a good interpretation of what life was for one particular child at one particular moment in time. So I want to pay homage to all the laundry workers, their wives and the children of laundry workers, and say, we love you because of all the sustainability and survival that you did to bring yourself up to a piece of America. So I would just want to share a silver lining of my appreciation for my dad, because I didn't understand him at 9, and less so afterwards when I would not follow his advice to remain quiet. He told a friend of mine who came from California to visit, he said, hey, Ron, my son Richard has a pretty good job. And so Ron said, what kind of job does he do, Mr. Chin? And my father said, I don't know, but he works in an office and he can sit down at a desk and somebody pays him to work. Now that's a good job. So with that, I'm closing, and I hope you could be inspired by bits of my story and share whatever parts of it that you might have experienced yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And hello to everyone. Thank you for joining. My background, I'll give you a little bit, is I was born in Wilmington, Delaware in 1950. And my father came to America around 1930 as a paper son. My mother was the first Chinese baby born in Wakefield, Massachusetts, but went back to live in Hong Kong prior to World War II and didn't come back to America until after World War II. I am one of 4 children by my parents, and our ages were about 5 years apart. And I was the oldest. And we grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, which was very different than Boston. There were only 4 Chinese families in the whole city of Wilmington, which at that time probably had 50,000 people. And my father and mother owned the laundry. We lived above it in the heart of the downtown. And when I say downtown, I mean all stores and all shops. We were the only family for 4 square blocks. And we lived on one side was the black section, and the other side of us was the white section. So we were sort of in the DMZ, if you will. And I do remember racism as pretty prevalent there, and I can still remember whites only signs. So that's sort of a little bit of a background. Now, having said that, we as a family were very close, and because we had to be. And by the time I was 6 or so, I remember working in the laundry. Every day after school, I would come back and do something in the laundry at work. So it began with sorting, but eventually it wasn't long before all of us, the children, were involved in some facet of, the laundry. Now, my family has a way of dealing with adversity, and we certainly experienced similar things as Richard did, and as probably Walter will tell you. But we dealt with it with a lot of humor, I have to admit. So one of the ways as kids we dealt with it, we would have races to see who could fold the most shirts. And we would sing songs. And I don't know if some of you are old enough to remember the song by Nancy Sinatra, "These Boots Are Made for Walking." Well, we take that song, and for example, and we would change the words to "These irons are made for folding or pressing." And we would sing and laugh and be, pretty darn silly about the whole thing. And it helped us to, pass the time. As I got older, I had to work in the steam room. And in Delaware, which is not just hot, but it's also very humid. Boy, that was really murder. Because the sweat would just drip off me as if I was in a, rain. But we survived it. And the only thing that sort of saved us was if we had homework, because homework was the only thing that took precedent over our work obligations. So I made sure to make my homework last longer. As a result of that, I actually did well at school, which of course pleased my parents and fed into the model minority myth. And of course they were proud I did well, but it was a two-sided coin. The flip side was, as I did well at school, I would get taunted by my peers for doing well or being a teacher's pet and so on. Anyway, it paid off. That is to say, my father sold the laundry. All the kids went to college. And I think the thing that I can sort of summarize is that it certainly taught us the value of not just work, but teamwork. And that you can get through just about anything if you learn how not to suffer alone. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Walter Wong. I'm out in California, but I was born and raised in Boston. I'm 71 years old. And for the first time in front of everybody today, I want to say I am a proud son of a laundryman. But truth be told, it wasn't always that way. As a young child, I felt ashamed of our family having a laundry because it played into Chinese stereotypes, and it inherently implied that we like to wash dirty laundry. We were Wong's Laundry that existed from 1948 to the mid-1970s, located in the working class district of Hyde Park in Boston. The family-run laundry consisted of my father, Wong, my mother, my brother John, my brother William, my sister Linda, and myself, and where I began working at the age 8 in the laundry. It was not only the place that we worked, it was our first home. It's where we ate, it's where we bathed, with no hot water, by the way, where we slept, and where we grew up. So what was it like? These memories have been tucked away in the far corners of my mind for well over 50 years. The sights that come to mind: 5 hot pressing machines used for different parts of the shirt. Our family of 6 working together. The fluorescent lighting that seemed to amplify our yellow skin. The sounds, the release of compressed air from the pressing machines. An AM radio blasting rock and roll music to help distract us from the tedious drudgery of the work. Touch, the heat from the presses, especially in the summer, when temperatures roll well over 100 degrees, plus humidity, and our bodies drenched in sweat. The burns on our skin from the presses, when we would momentarily lose focus, some leaving permanent scars. The smell, the lingering smell of dirty shirts embedded with the pungent sweat and body odor of the white man that we served. The outside world, the 50s and 60s, was a period of great change and turbulence, socially, culturally, politically, and racially. And this would at times come to us. We would be subject to racial taunts by the kids from the local Catholic school that came to the doorsteps of the laundry as we worked. This all seemed to come to a head when I refer to it as the egg incident. You can imagine this. Our laundry was located on Hyde Park Avenue, which is the main road in Hyde Park. Again, a working class Irish and Italian area. It was November of 1963. I remember it well because my mother was in the hospital, and also was the time when President Kennedy got assassinated. We were working, pressing shirts into the evening, and suddenly the window of the laundry got hit with raw eggs. We glanced out and saw the perpetrators, other teenagers. Myself, my 2 brothers, and my father, we rushed out of the laundry into the middle of the street, stopping traffic in both directions. As the 4 of us, we were able to reach and catch one of the perpetrators, pressing him to the ground, holding him down, my father catching up, kicking him. And then we grabbed him, twisting his arm, bringing him back to the laundry. getting him to confess what he had done, and ultimately made him clean up. But you got to imagine what it was like. This could have turned out to be very badly. 4 Chinese grabbing a white kid in a white community, stopping traffic. It was a scene I'll never forget. Against all of this, we proudly stood together as a family with hopes and dreams for a better future. I want to dispel any notions that this life was ever of a happy Chinese laundryman. He was hard physically, mentally, and emotionally, coupled with relentless racial prejudice. We, the laundry children, who managed to get some education, we broke new ground, often into non-traditional careers beyond the bounds of the laundry, and giving us great personal meaning to the phrase, free at last. Thank you for listening.
So thank you very much to all our speakers so far, Professor Shauna Lo, artist in residence, Wen-hao Tien, and our witnesses from their own childhood, their own life, Mr. Richard Jing, Ray Jing, and Walter Wong. What I've heard is really very moving, especially the testimonies that we just heard, the racism, but also the good humor, growing up in laundries, in very difficult conditions, and yet having this contact with adults, your father, your family, who had to withstand this kind of pressure and at the same time help you as children to grow up. So it's really something that makes us all feel very proud for you of being the children of laundrymen. So as Walter told us, I might have been ashamed back then, but now I'm very proud of that history. My role here, and I teach Chinese history at Boston University, is to bring together these voices a little bit and start a conversation amongst ourselves that then can continue with the Q&A with all the public that is following us. I can see that there are 133 participants so far, and that is really wonderful. I would like to start with Shauna and Wen-hao, and maybe ask also our 3 guests, Ray, Walter, and Richard, to pitch in if they have some comments, and talk about generations. Shauna, you mentioned that the people that you interviewed in your oral history project were mainly from a previous generation than the one of Ray, Walter, and Richard, who grew up in the late 40s, into the 50s, and into the 60s. These were actually belonging to an earlier time when technology was much more limited, and therefore work was much harder. Usually there was one single person running a laundry, maybe with another or 2 people only helping, all a society of men. What we have heard instead from Walter, from Ray, from Richard, is families who lived inside the laundry shop, on top of the laundry shop. So if you can tell us a little bit about this generational change and how it connects across time, and then I will try to bring in also Wen-hao's work into that. But let's start first with a conversation between Shauna and maybe our 3 witnesses about this generational change. You have something to comment on that?
Well, actually, the people that I interviewed were all from laundry families, but maybe a decade or 2 before the guest today. So I think in terms of the technology, they were quite similar by then. Unfortunately, I was not able to interview anyone who worked the laundry by themselves. In other words, they didn't have family here. But I did talk with Tunney Lee, and he did tell me that one of his relatives was a single man who was working a laundry in East Boston for decades. He was by himself. He didn't bring his wife here until many years later. But my understanding is that there were still many laundries that were run by single men, or maybe with a partner or two, into the 40s, probably. After World War II, there were some immigration acts that allowed Chinese American veterans and Chinese American citizens to bring wives from China here. And that's when you see more of a kind of family situation running a laundry. So things did change, from decade to decade, generation to generation. And I wasn't able to talk to anyone who really recalls a time before machinery, time when they were washing, doing things by hand. So that was, unfortunately, it was too late. I started the project too late for that.
So if I can follow up now with Ray, Walter, and Richard, did you or your family have an experience of being in touch with an earlier generation of laundrymen? Was there a connection, for example, between your own families and those that you found already in Massachusetts when you arrived? I believe that all of you probably are from Taishanese descent. And so there is that kind of dialect or language connection, family connection. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? It would be very interesting to understand and see if maybe you can help make that connection that Shauna, simply because of the time we live in, was not able to do because these people were not around any longer.
I'll make a comment. I think these weekly visits in the Chinatown for shopping and so forth were the only times that we had interaction. Otherwise, we were very much isolated. And it was very lonely in that regard. You were aware of other laundries. My parents were probably more directly familiar with the owners of these various laundries. They were not direct competitors because they were geographically dispersed. So, but they were aware, and they would share, I'm sure, a degree of war stories, if you will, that they were experiencing in their respective locations, because the laundries were spread out so far. The only opportunity for any real connection was during the Sunday visits into Chinatown.
Ray and Richard, did you have the same experience that only the Sunday visits to Chinatown were moments of community for you, or were there other ways also to communicate?
Well, there were only 4 families, and we got together every holiday or wedding or funeral. And Sundays were the days that most of us would go to Philadelphia. That was the closest Chinatown. And occasionally we'd just go to New York, which was about 2.5 hours by car. And so I think the one reason we survived, and what I think to be the ordeal, and was we grew up, as I said, pretty isolated, but my mother was a Catholic, and she, when she married my father had to sign a paper that the priest, in order to be married, that we would be raised Catholic. So as a result, all of the kids, we went to a parochial school, a Catholic school called St. Peter's Cathedral. Now, the thing about St. Peter's Cathedral, it was founded as the school for orphans. And that was because during the Civil War, the DuPont people made munitions for both the North and the South. And that's how the DuPont people made their money. Well, the munitions plants would regularly blow up, killing the men and sometimes the women, leaving orphans. So we all went to school with the tradition of orphans. Now, what that meant was we went to school with Black kids, white kids, and for example, during the Cuban Missile Crisis and all those times when Puerto Rican and Cuban kids, they all came to St. Peter's. So I went to school in a very multiracial, school, and I think that just simply that helped us to integrate into the society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a great point. And I think, Richard, you mentioned at the end of your testimony the fact that after this terrible encounter with the Irish kids outside of your laundry, you later became friends with some of them. You would go to their homes. So can you also add something to this thought that Ray had about, multiracial encounters in your own young life?
Yes, I know there's a lot of questions. I'll be brief. My father came as a paper son when he was 13 years old and worked in the laundry at Dudley Street. So he was assimilated to white Irish firemen who helped him out. And as a paper son, that was the other threat that he feared and constantly had, that if he ever made a mistake or a criminal, he could be deported, and that would be the worst thing to happen. And he worked around. In fact, in one of the laundries, I was raised by a Black woman and her family who brought me across the street. She was a help at the laundry, and she would help me eat soul food and play in the coals downstairs in the basement. I guess they didn't have heat. But my father, in the last laundry, he inherited the laundry. There was a Chinese man who was waiting and trying to find my father, but could never find him because he was always at the laundry. My father popped up one day and he says, hey, Chin, this is your laundry. Okay. And so that's kind of the short of it. But my father was very acclimated to the rest of society, and we did a lot of things so he could speak English and read the newspapers. And that's why when he said during my incident, no speak good English, I said, what the heck? You're not stupid. And but I think he was just being very clever in playing up to the stereotype of the Irish family so that he could get away from that volatile situation.
So one last question for Wen-hao, and then we will open up to our Q&A. Wen-hao, you very humbly said, I'm just an artist in residence. I was not born and did not grow up in Chinatown. I had to learn about this history. And in a way, I am an outsider. I tried to bring in my own artistic sensibility here. And you gave the example of the Scholars' Rock made of shirts, trying to bring together the high art of the Chinese literati, what they imagine to be the most sophisticated form of scholarly and artistic communication, with a humble life of the laundrymen of Chinatown. Now, tell us a little bit more how you see this issue of class. And maybe our friends here can also say, how did you yourself relate to this great artistic, cultural traditions of China. Did you feel Chinese? In what sense? And did this kind of culture also belong to you? So first, maybe Wen-hao, you can start, and then maybe Richard, Ray, and Walter can also tell us about going into Chinese school or learning how to write in Chinese or their relationship to Chinese culture.
Thank you for the question, Eugenio. I'm just really humbled today because I'm learning along my way, right? And so all of this is new to me. All of the Chinatown history is very new to me. And so in terms of high art or popular art, or I intentionally, in my exhibition, I intentionally interpret every story, every stimulation into a highest art form I can imagine. And I'm not a person who's like snob, like high art, popular art, that kind of thing. But I have to share an extremely humbling experience about Scholar Rock. You know, it's imperial art and later literati art, right? But I realized that it was me. It was me, like the useless scholars, not going to nature, staring at a rock, thinking they will understand the mountains, the rivers, through looking at a rock. It was me looking at my rock, the Laundry rock, and imagining all the stories all the stories and histories and feelings that's experienced by a very widespread generation, multi-generation of Chinese immigrants that I couldn't personally really understand. That frustrates me, but it really humbles me. And I think an analogy of a Scholar Rock for me really, at the end of the day, is me looking at a rock and trying to understand. And so, I'm a little speechless today because when I'm researching the Chinese laundry, and I was really overwhelmed by the degree of discrimination that the laundrymen suffered. You know, when we talk about laundrymen, we have to think about the railroad man first, right? And the back-breaking and dangerous task during the building of the Sacramento to Utah, that line was given to the Chinese. I don't know if you know a famous story and accomplishment, the last leg of 10 miles, they did it in one day. The Chinese accomplished the last 10 miles of the railroad of their portion in one day. And you can Google and read about how did they accomplish that. But and afterwards, and I'm thinking like, of course they are prohibited from doing other work, because now they've shown the world the Chinese can do a lot, right? And building this railroad back then is like us going to the moon or Mars today. It marked the industrialization, the infrastructure of building America. So if you put these two things together, and I'm learning a lot about the history of discrimination.
Great, thank you. And maybe if you guys, Richard, Ray, or Walter, want to say anything about the relationship that you yourself had with Chinese culture, the culture you came from, and the integration on the other side in American professional life, just to close our little conversation now.
I'll make a comment. It's funny because what I found is when I grew up, I didn't speak English. It was like I lived within the walls of the laundry. It felt like Chinese culture. When I walked out the door, I walked into America and everything that implies. As I said, we were isolated. We were not able to go to Chinese school because there was no way to get us into Chinatown. And I was isolated from my peers until I reached college age, when I actively made a conscious effort to seek out the community and make connections. By that time, I was probably into my early 20s. So it was you go through a whole period of when you're isolated in that fashion. You know, as a kid, the most important thing you want to be able to do is to feel like you can fit in. And so you go through this whole period of identity crisis. And I don't think it's unusual to find that Asians under these kind of circumstances often had gone through identity crisis. But it took an active and conscious effort to try to connect with the Chinese community and be able to get proper perspective of where we stood in the broader society. And I think that, quite frankly, is an ongoing challenge even today, because throughout the course of, as media evolved, the images of Chinese, especially Chinese men, were always negative and somewhat without the manliness that is typically conveyed, because film is very powerful. And we always portray it in this lowly kind of fashion in the media. Where we walked in the streets, we were viewed in that fashion. So there were a lot of barriers you had to break through. Ultimately, I believe it was education, quite frankly, that became key, because you're able to develop the vocabulary, if you will, to articulate what you experienced. But not everybody is able to do that, even with some education. It's a very difficult thing to be able to bring what's inside of you and put it into words to share with other people, that they can understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. Thank you. This is a wonderful beginning to a conversation. We now open up to Q&As, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to look at those that are posted on our list here and read them out. Several questions actually are about ways to do more research on the Chinese laundries in Boston. And this question is mainly, I would say, for Shauna Lo, but also for our three gentlemen from the laundries themselves. Are there, for example, websites? Are there ways of learning about these places? What is the kind of literature that exists? Maybe Professor Lo, you can tell us a little bit about that.
I'm not a professor. You can just call me Shauna.
Hi, Shauna.
Like I said, there's very little documentation on Chinese-owned laundries. There's really only a couple of books. One is the Paul Sue. It was written, that's more about the experience of the men who were here without their families, running a laundry by themselves. It's based on he did a study, I think it was, I don't know if it was in the 30s, in the Midwest. Then there's another book, John Jung. I think he's actually a participant today. He has a few books about the laundry experience, focusing on his experience in the South, I believe. And he has a very nice website, which has all sorts of stories and articles and stories about laundry owning families. I know someone had asked about if there's some database or list of laundries in Boston. There isn't. There's the 1931 directory at the Chinese Historical Society, and there's a few, they have a few other directories from other years. I think the 20s, maybe the 40s. Those aren't comprehensive lists. There isn't any. The one way to try to look up laundries is to go to the City Hall. They have directories for every year and every city in their archives. And for a certain period of time, they had a special section for Chinese laundries, listings. And I don't know how comprehensive those are either. There's the census records, historical census records, which I've looked at, but I can't tell you about the laundries exactly. It tells you, it's, you know, it's a listing of residents and what they did for what their occupation was. So it's you don't know for sure if the laundry was located at the same address. So it's difficult.
Yeah. So I think that actually those of you who are interested can always follow up with Shauna. You can find her online at UMass, at the Institute for Asian American Studies, but also I'm sure that the Pao Center can put you in touch with her. She can give you some advice on that. I don't know if our friends Walter, Richard, or Ray have done some research. Richard, go ahead.
Yes, I just want to say that there's been a lack of available readings and stuff like that, but I just want to draw on the resources that so many of us, hundreds of thousands of children of the laundrymen who are still living and very capable to share their stories, and they need to be heard. I'm one of 5 Chinese guys in America that's not good with computers, so I can't start a post or a blog or anything like that. But I think that we all have some stories to tell, and while there may be some similarities, there are some very different, like some people who grew up in a very wonderful environment where the laundry was located, and they didn't have any racial intolerance, and they were mainstream into the society. And I say, God bless you who had a wonderful relationship, but the majority of us in Boston anyways, which was a very racist city back in the 50s and 60s, did not encounter a welcoming. In fact, my father said to me, he said, don't ever make the white man feel secondary to you. That is not a good position for you to be in. And he was not racist. He was just trying to protect me in the most simplest terms that he understood. So I think that race relations have improved as we met other good people and surrounded us with educated and diverse people that we welcome the diversity. You know, the Chinese laundry is really an American story. It's a bit of Americana that it doesn't exist in China or Hong Kong. So please, I encourage any of you who are out there listening to come forth with your stories. It would be a pleasure. When I found out that Walter and I worked in laundries, we talked for hours, you know, and we're only 2 people sharing common stories. And so I think that there's a lot more commonality that can be shared. And
that's wonderful. And of course, we've been recording all that we said today, but there are several people who are mentioning that their families were actually in the laundry business here in Boston. So I would encourage those individuals who are asking about this kind of scholarship, information, and so on, to really get in touch with Shauna, with the Pao Center, with our friends today, and really get onto more research in this topic and really collect this sort of oral histories and combine it with what is found in the archives. There are several questions also about the experience of race relations. For example, some are asking about the white and black neighborhoods. You've mentioned that many Chinese laundries were located in the border zones between white and black neighborhoods. Were your customers white or black or mixed, and what kind of relationship did you have with them?
Can I make a comment? Oh, I'm sorry, Ray. What I was going to say, at least with respect to Boston, I always found it historically in Boston, race relations was primarily a black and white kind of issue. And being in the white area, what I always found growing up, though I was not white, I wasn't black. So you would find the white kids would be very open, maybe forgetting the fact that I was there. And you would get a very candid viewpoint of how they really felt about race relations. Later on, when I developed black friendships, the opposite happened. Because I wasn't white, they were very open and candid about how they felt. And it kind of gives you a perspective of what the dynamics were in terms of race relations in Boston. For Chinese and Asians, we were so historically so few in numbers. It was a community that was largely ignored. You weren't enough voters, so you didn't see the politicians come down until recent years. And so you were basically ignored. It's one thing to be outwardly racist towards you. Another form of racism is to completely ignore you and don't even acknowledge your existence, being like the invisible man. They look right through you. So it's a different kind of experience as I found it. And perhaps Raymond, you could talk about it since your laundry was between white and black communities.
Go ahead, Ray.
Thank you, Walter. It was, I certainly experienced racism from both whites and blacks, but I also experienced incredible acceptance and protection from white and black people, Hispanic as well. I have to say that my father and mother were very outgoing. My father is an example. During World War II, he worked in the Wilmington shipyard. It's called Drabo. And he was very skilled welder. In fact, he was one of the few people that could actually weld stainless steel. And because he had been in America by then for probably about 15 years, his English was good enough that he was made sort of the foreman of the Chinese workers, because he could speak enough English and Chinese. Well, one of the things that he did, and by the way, the Drabo plant, what they built were the landing ships for D-Day. And he, at that time, you had ration coupons like stamps. And one day after the war, when I was older, I was at a farmer's market, and the butcher said to introduce himself. He says, "You know who I am?" I says, "No." I mean, he was a stranger. He said, "Your father and I ran a black market during the war." And this is a white guy. And what my father would do was he would collect the ration coupons for coffee and sugar, which the Chinese really didn't want that much of. And so he would bargain with him and make trades so that the Chinese could get the pork and different things that they wanted. And so that was my father. My father also, I have to tell you, would never go to a white doctor. So he had a black doctor that he really liked, Dr. Goen. And I was introduced to a whole new world. One day, Dr. Goen invited our family to dinner. And I walked into his house, and I was older, I was a teenager then, and he said to me, and I saw this beautiful mural and so forth, and different artwork and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, Dr. Goen was a friend of James Baldwin, Langston Hughes, and all of the black literati. And so I learned a lot of stuff from Dr. Goens about all these things that you read about in a book. And here was a man who actually knew them and visited them. And at the time, the blacks would literally lease a cruise ship. I mean, not lease it, I mean, but just have a cruise ship, and all the black people would go to France, especially France, for a holiday. And so I was introduced to that. And the other thing about the Catholic St. Peter's, because I was raised a Catholic and all that, I had godparents. Now my godparents were Italian. They were the D'Onofrios. and another set were the plumbers. So we had all of these, at that time, white people who were sort of literally our guardians. So I grew up again with a lot of multicultural experiences. And I needed it because Wilmington, Delaware is a pretty darn racist place. Just to give you one last example of when Martin Luther King was assassinated, there were riots and in Wilmington. And the National Guard were called out to protect, if you will, the downtown DuPont area. Well, you might not know this, but Wilmington, Delaware was under martial law for over a year. There were National Guardsmen stationed on Wilmington on my street corner. And I got stopped more than once for being past curfew. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
And again, you learned really how to, if you will, pick your team, so to speak, the people who are going to help you. You learned how to assess that. That was my growing up.
Thank you. So I think that these testimonies really are fantastic in showing to us also how different minorities lived together, grew together. And so that besides many negative aspects, there are also positive aspects in growing up in these communities. And some of the questions that have been asked was exactly about this. What was the relationship with other minorities? Were there also positive aspects in growing up in these communities? And so I think that you have given us some sense of also hope for the, coming from the past, for the present and into the future. I think we have actually reached our time. We're a little bit over time actually. So I will need to close here with this upbeat notes, also inviting you all to go to the Pao Center when possible and visit the exhibition by Wen-hao that builds up in part on what we have heard about the world of the laundry today. And now I leave the floor to our organizers who will give us a farewell at the end. I think, Cynthia, you're in charge now.
Actually, Cynthia had to go, so it's me.
Okay.
All right. So thank you, everyone. On behalf of the Chinese Historical Society of New England, the Pao Arts Center, and all of our guests today, I want to thank you for attending. Before we sign off, we're going to be launching a poll for feedback at today's event. You'll also receive a survey from us let me just open that poll up for you. You'll also be receiving a survey from us. And we encourage you to please share your thoughts with us, either by the poll or the survey or both. A special thanks to Cynthia Wu from the Pao Arts Center, and of course our behind the scene experts, Leslie Condon and Ashley Young, and also to our event supporters, Tufts Medical Center, the BU Center for Asia Studies, the Boston Foundation, South Cove Community Health Center, and the Margaret Wong Family Foundation. And of course, thank you to all of our individual supporters like you joining us today. Thank you to everyone who donated to this event, which will support both the Pao Arts Center and the Chinese Historical Society of New England. If you like our work and wish to support our efforts further, you can of course donate to either the Pao Arts Center at paoartscenter.org/donate or the Chinese Historical Society of New England at chisney.org. Lastly, I want to acknowledge that we are facing a very difficult time and all of us continue to face various challenges and repercussions. 1 year ago, our way of work and life were drastically changed. The Chinatown community has especially been affected by anti-Asian sentiment that has resurfaced this past year. As part of Pao Arts Center and BCNC's work to support the AAPI community, they are coming together with other AAPI organizations across the state to hold a Massachusetts town hall on anti-Asian racism. This event will take place on Thursday, March 25th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. We've just added the link to the chat, or will be in a moment. And if you wish to join the meeting directly on March 25th, please do attend. We also include the link in our post-event email to be sent out early next week. Thank you so much, and you can watch our closing slideshow now.
So Leslie,
Hello.
say, do we open again for those who would like to have a little chat right now or not?
I would love
Um,
to. I need to have a therapy session.
Brianna actually needs to sign off, and I don't know if she can leave it open for us because it's through Chesney. Brianna, do you want to chime in? Brianna?
Sorry. No, I can't leave it open, unfortunately, because it's our.
I will send a new link. How about I send a new link to all of you?
But
Okay.
I have to run. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. It was a very moving experience, especially to hear from Ray and from Richard, from Walter. That was just amazing to hear your stories. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
And
thank
how you have really channeled your emotion on screen. We could see that you were very touched as well. So thank you. And Shauna, your work is amazing. People need to know more about it. So please don't be shy. You know, I shared your links and I hope
Thank
that
you.
people will come and talk to you. And many of those who today shared the history of their families and their questions will follow up and maybe you can interview them. That would be fantastic. So I'm really grateful again for having you include me in this, and this will enrich my teaching. You know, like Wen-hao, even more than Wen-hao, I am, of course, a white man. I'm outside of Chinatown, but I teach US-China relations to my students, and this was an incredible experience. I hope some of my students also joined today and could enjoy this. So that's all I wanted to say. I have to run, but hope to see you soon again.
Thank you, Eugenio, for a
Thank
very nice
you.
job.
You guys were the job. I did nothing. All right. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
All right.
I just want to say that I had a few texts from women friends who grew up in the Laundry. And I just put on this, said, I wish we could hear more stories from them because it's very important too, their dynamics, their thoughts and stuff like that. And I'm sure there's a lot of great stories out there that were less negative than ours, you know, but everything needs to be told if it's possible.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, Richard and Raymond and Walter, that when I was doing the interviews, I asked people about discrimination, racism, experiences with that, and really none of them either wanted to talk about it or felt like discussing it. Maybe just one or two people mentioned it. So I'm not sure why that is. I know it was a bit of a couple decades maybe before your experiences, but I was curious about that myself. And Brianna, I hope Chisney will consider carrying on the project.
It is something we're working on. I can share.
Okay. Because I'm done with this for now. So I'm happy to pass on whatever I have to Chisney.
Perfect. That would be wonderful. I'll email you on Monday morning.
Yeah, and talk about it.
Perfect.
Can I just make a comment? I think that when you go through difficult times and pain, it is most people don't want to relive it. And when you talk about it, you have to relive it. It's like someone that gets assaulted. You don't want to, part of you just wants to go past and you want to move to the future. And sharing those kind of stories requires you to reveal your inner self. And I don't think, especially Chinese, are going to be articulating their emotions openly in that fashion. It doesn't mean they didn't experience it. It's just that it's hard for them to do it. And I think that perhaps we're a little bit more, as a panel of community folks, a little bit more comfortable with expressing those things. But I think that's more rare than common. Certainly men in general tend to be less able to express emotion than women. But I got to just add, just relative to what Richard said, I did talk to my sister. She's not the type that would come onto a panel like this. And she certainly validated everything that we've been discussing. She mentioned that the laundry felt like home. And when that egg incident happened, she was no longer felt safe. And she added additionally, probably the dimension of sexism as she was growing up. Because I think as an Asian female, you're also subject to sexism and being a sexual object in addition to the racism. So it's another dimension to the problem that we've been discussing. So that's my opinion.
I think you're right, Walter.
I have a question for my fellow panelists, and Leslie, Brianna, and Ashley. I took a little risk today by showing the song of Lucy Shelton, and that is actually the only one in the public, like a sort of mainstream, I would say mainstream art and culture that the work is of good quality and efforts. But I understand some people can be offended by it because it was a very vivid. It's, you know, she's a very accomplished soprano. And the poem is by, you know, Mr. Zhang grew up in China and came here and studied at Stanford. So, you know, these are all like, but the work, it was very real. It's a very real artwork that was trying to describe the situation, and there are not many, like none. So I think for the African American people, there are a lot of music, but for Chinese people, how are we expressing? Like what is the form to heal? You know, like, you know, this is a good way.
Yeah, Wen-hao, I think we just have to have a longer discussion about it, because I think it was a situation where we just needed to give more context, because I think people had a lot of assumptions about the song and didn't understand the historical significance and kind of the actual lyrics and their meaning, which is so true about so many songs, you know, from the Asian American experience. A lot of people don't, or American experience, I should say. Like there's a lot of folk songs that people have like this idea that it's about patriotism, but it's actually about like resistance and things like that. And so I think we just have to talk more about this offline sometime, because I know that Brianna actually has to go in a minute. But just to say that I think we just have to be careful, and maybe something like that needs to be prefaced to the audience before playing it, because again, like I think people are just having a very visceral reaction. So it's like trying to balance the intellectual responses in addition to people's biological responses. And we certainly don't want to cause harm, even if the harm is based on misconceptions about the meaning of something.
Yeah, do you feel, were you gentlemen feeling sensitive of the song I played?
Well, to me, I felt it was an aspect of how Chinese history, I think it's a component of it. And unfortunately, there's a lot more to it, but what is in the public domain is you get these little snapshots of how the mainstream society views the Chinese. And so there's a lot of these stereotypical things that will come to mind, because most people will only remember kung fu movies or the Chinese sex object Susie Wong, or, you know, you get these different, but it's not a complete picture. But the song and the music, even though it might offend some people, that's a component of it. And the fact it's the lack of more richness and more representation that people can react to it.
Yeah, I think Yeah, my goal was to give in some visual, like this is real, this thing does exist. And visual and sound act differently in people's psyche.
Right.
Well,
The real,
I'll give you a point of view. It's just like Porgy and Bess. You know the opera?
Mhm.
Mhm.
It's a white man's version of how to make somebody else's suffering art.
Mm.
And so you have to look at it from that point of view. You take somebody's suffering and you make it art. Now, I'm not sure that's so good.
Yeah, so again, Brianna actually has to go. She actually had to go a little while ago. So Wen-hao, if you want to email a Zoom link to everybody, you're welcome, obviously, to congregate on a separate place, but we can't keep this open because it's Chesney's. And I don't want to force her to change her schedule anymore. So
Yeah.
Hey, I just want to say, I really enjoyed being with all of you. And
Yes.
I loved hearing your stories, seeing your artwork, your research, and of course, all the, effort to put this all together. So thank you very much for letting me be part of this.
Thank you.
You know, I'll make myself available because I like to talk. So anybody who wants to connect with me or whatever, just let me know.
awesome.
Sounds
And
good.
Where can people see the recording?
So Will, oh, go ahead.
YouTube, and I'll email out the Chisney mailing. I'll mail them it there, and then I'll send it to Pao, and they can send out to whoever they do. I think you're part of our mailing list, so you're fine.
Great, great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just want to say, so nice for everybody. And Raymond, thank you very much for sharing. I didn't know anything about Wilmington, Delaware. And I had my own misconceptions. And when you say that it was a very racist city, I had no idea that it was. So, your journey is remarkable and one to thank you for sharing as well.
Yeah, thank you. We should probably get together again, and because there are so many stories that
Yes, you're right. You're right.
that we all share and can share,
Yeah.
and I love to hear them.
Yeah.
So, you know what, Richard, you're the community organizer of this. I mean, that's your business.
Oh no, I'm retired. That's why I put it up there.
Okay. Well, why don't you send an email and propose a time, and I'll be happy
Yeah,
to join it.
You know what? Walton might be coming back in the fall, and so that's a possibility if we can.
Or
get
even
together.
summer. Yeah.
Yeah, in the summer. So we'll be in touch because I want this to be kind of a mechanism to support each other.
Yeah, we could, and by then, by the way, I've had both my shots. So
Me too.
yeah, see, we can
Me
get
three.
together when you get to Boston.